Welcome to WW2 Rewired, the channel where history is not just retold, but relived. Here, we unravel the hidden threads of the Second World War, the forgotten front lines, the human tragedies, and the chilling decisions that changed the fate of nations. Each episode brings the past to life, not through numbers and dates, but through emotion, memory, and the echo of footsteps long gone. In this documentary, we journey deep into the heart of winter, to the frostbitten steppes of Russia, where an army once hailed as unstoppable was consumed by the cold. This is not a tale of glory. It is a story of survival, desperation, and the price of pride. Through archival accounts, soldier diaries, and vivid historical reconstruction, we'll uncover what truly happened when more than 100,000 men vanished into a frozen hell. This is WW2 Rewired. History re-examined. Humanity remembered. They came as conquerors. The mighty 6th Army of Germany. Banners high, engines roaring across the endless plains of Russia. They believed victory was inevitable, that no force on earth could stop the machine of the Reich. But then, winter came. The snow fell quietly at first, like an omen ignored. Temperatures dropped to 40 below zero. Weapons froze. Engines stopped. Men shivered in foxholes, praying for warmth that never came. From November 1942 to February 1943, one of the largest armies in history disappeared. Not in battle, but in silence. Swallowed by the cold, the hunger, and the iron grip of the Soviet counterattack. This is the story of those who marched into Russia full of confidence and never came back. It's the story of Stalingrad, where 100,000 men vanished beneath the snow, leaving behind frozen rifles, empty helmets, and echoes that still whisper across the steppe. In the summer of 1942, the German war machine stretched its iron claws toward the Volga River. Operation Blue, Hitler's grand vision to crush Soviet resistance and seize the oil fields of the Caucasus, was in full motion. The 6th Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, was its pride. Nearly 300,000 men, confident, disciplined, hardened by victories in Poland, France, and the steppes of Ukraine. To them, the city of Stalingrad was just another target, another name on the long list of conquered lands. Soldiers joked they would spend Christmas back in Germany. They believed the Red Army was broken. The Russian spirit, they thought, had already frozen. Sound. Tank engines grow louder. Distant explosions echo. But the road to Stalingrad was more than a path through fields and villages. It was a descent into madness. The further east they marched, the longer the supply lines grew. The summer heat turned the roads into rivers of dust. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition trickled in. Horses collapsed from exhaustion. Yet the 6th Army pressed on. They reached the Volga in September 1942, battered but unbroken. The city they found was not one of grandeur. It was rubble, smoke, and fire. The Soviets refused to yield. Every street, every building, every stairwell became a fortress. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. Men fought room by room, bayonet to bayonet, amidst corpses and debris. Still, they believed the end was near. One more push, they said, then home. But as autumn faded, something sinister crept across the plains. The skies darkened, the air turned sharp, and the first snow fell. No one celebrated it. Not even the men who longed for the coolness after months of burning sun. Because deep down, they remembered what had happened to Napoleon. Soft wind begins to rise. Snow crackles. The snow was not a blanket. It was a warning. And the German army didn't listen. By late October, the first real storm hit. Temperatures dropped overnight. The Volga froze at its edges. Soldiers wrapped themselves in tattered blankets, newspapers and curtains looted from homes. Their uniforms, made for summer campaigns, offered little warmth. Frostbite set in quickly. Fingers turned black. Faces blistered in the wind. A medic's journal read, "We ran out of gloves. Men tear the bandages from the dead to cover their hands." Yet, the orders from headquarters remained unchanged. Advance. They pushed deeper into the ruins, unaware that the Soviet High Command, the Stavka, was quietly preparing the trap that would consume them all. Behind the front lines, General Zhukov and General Vasilevsky amassed hundreds of thousands of fresh troops. T-34 tanks rolled in by the thousands. The Red Army was no longer retreating. It was waiting. In November, the snow turned red. The Germans fought for each street corner, but the Soviets fought for every inch of their homeland. The wind carried screams, gunfire, and the howl of the frozen steppe. One soldier wrote home, "We no longer fight men. We fight the cold, the hunger, and the endless white." Their rations froze solid. Bread became as hard as stone. Soup turned to ice before reaching their lips. And still, the snow kept falling. By mid-November, the Sixth Army was exhausted, unaware that the storm to end them was already on the horizon. The snow was no longer their enemy. It was their grave. November 19, 1942, dawn. The frozen earth trembles. The Soviets strike, Operation Uranus. The code name for the Great Encirclement begins. Over 1 million Soviet troops surge through the icy fog from north and south of Stalingrad. Their target, the flanks of the German Sixth Army, defended not by elite soldiers, but by weary Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions ill-equipped for the Russian winter. Sound. Whistles, roaring artillery, engines starting, chaos. The Soviet offensive is a storm of fire. Rockets streak through the air, painting the horizon crimson. Tanks crush trenches. Men vanish under avalanches of snow and steel. Within 48 hours, both flanks collapse. Entire regiments are overrun or annihilated. The Sixth Army, still locked in brutal urban combat inside Stalingrad, suddenly finds itself cut off, surrounded. Radio crackles. We are encircled. Repeat, encircled. The enemy is everywhere. At first, German command dismisses the reports as panic. But then the messages grow desperate. Units vanish. Roads disappear under snow. The Soviet pincers, from Kalak in the west and from the south near Kotelnikovo, meet on November 23rd. A steel ring closes. Inside it, 22 divisions, nearly 300,000 men. The Sixth Army is trapped. From the air, the frozen wasteland looks like a giant white crater, a bowl of death. The soldiers inside call it Der Kessel, the cauldron. The Germans are ordered to hold their positions, to await resupply by air. But the Luftwaffe, already stretched to breaking, cannot deliver even a fraction of what's needed. Out of the promised 700 tons of supplies per day, only 90 arrive, sometimes less. Fuel, food, ammunition, all vanish into the snow. One soldier writes in his diary, "We are buried alive." The snow covers everything, even hope. The Soviets tighten the noose. Town after town falls. Any attempt to break out is crushed beneath Soviet armor. By early December, the men inside the Kessel begin to understand. They are not waiting for rescue. They are waiting to die. In his warm headquarters in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler receives the reports from Stalingrad. The words are clear. Encircled. Supplies exhausted. Army at risk of annihilation. But Hitler does not waver. His voice, cold and commanding, cuts through the static. Stalingrad must be held. Not one step backward. To him, the city is not a battlefield. It is a symbol. The city that bears Stalin's name must fall. To retreat would be to admit weakness. So he gives his order. The Sixth Army will stand fast. General Friedrich Paulus, a cautious man by nature, obeys. He believes in discipline, in structure, in duty. But deep down, he knows the truth. His army is doomed. Still, he cannot disobey the Führer. Back in the Kessel, temperatures drop to 30 degrees. Men huddle together in shell holes, wrapped in rags, sharing the warmth of their breath. The Luftwaffe's supply planes, slow, outdated Junkers, are picked off one by Soviet fighters. Parachuted crates fall into enemy hands or shatter on the frozen ground. Inside the ruins of Stalingrad, the soldiers burn whatever they can find, furniture, books, even oil-soaked rags, to stay alive. A radio transmission from a trapped officer reads, "Tell my wife, we did our duty." Hitler promotes Paulus to field marshal on January 30th, 1943. A cruel gesture. No German field marshal has ever surrendered, and Hitler expects him to take his own life. But Paulus refuses. He will not die for Hitler's pride. He will live and witness the fall. By now, over 100,000 Germans are dead or dying. The rest are starving. The once mighty Sixth Army, the pride of the Wehrmacht, is reduced to scavengers, frostbitten, hollow-eyed, clinging to broken rifles. They whisper a single word in disbelief: Veritin. Betrayed. And above them, in the endless white sky, the vultures of winter circle, patient, silent, eternal. They came seeking glory, but found only ice. By December 1942, Stalingrad was no longer a city. It was a graveyard of smoke and silence. Inside the Kessel, the German Sixth Army had ceased to function as an army. No fuel, no food, no medicine. Every day, hundreds froze to death. Others starved, too weak to hold a rifle. The once proud soldiers of the Reich now scavenged like animals. They boiled belts and horsehide for soup. They scraped frost from windows for water. Some even resorted to eating the flesh of their fallen comrades. A rumor whispered in shame, but confirmed in diaries found decades later. The men no longer feared the Soviets. They feared the cold. They feared waking up and finding the man beside them frozen solid, his eyes open, his hands still clutching his weapon. Letters home tell the story best. Dearest Anna, we have no bread. We dream of soup. The snow is everywhere. Tell the children I think of them each night, when I can still feel my hands. Civilians, trapped alongside the soldiers, fared no better. Entire families hid in basements, surviving on melted snow and candle wax. Their breath hung in the air like ghosts. Meanwhile, the Red Army tightened its grip. Soviet artillery never ceased. Shells rained down on the trapped soldiers day and night. One sergeant described it. The bombardment was endless. You couldn't tell the thunder from the artillery. Even the dead seemed to shiver. Disease spread faster than bullets. Dysentery, typhus, pneumonia. Medical units collapsed under the weight of the dying. Morphine ran out. Needles froze. Doctors worked in candlelight, their breath clouding over wounded men who no longer screamed. Still, Paulus obeyed Hitler's order. No surrender. To surrender meant treason. To retreat meant execution. So they stayed and waited. By Christmas, the Sixth Army was dying in place. Soldiers carved tiny Christmas trees from wood splinters, placed bullets as ornaments, and sang Silent Night through cracked lips. There was no glory left in Stalingrad, only hunger, frost, and the echo of a world slowly fading away. The final weeks of January 1943 brought a silence unlike any other. Even the guns seemed tired. What remained of the Sixth Army was scattered across ruins and snowdrifts. Out of nearly 300,000 men, fewer than half were still alive. And those who were barely resembled soldiers. Their faces were pale and hollow. Their uniforms hung like rags. Their boots were wrapped in bandages. their hands in scraps of cloth. Frost clung to their eyelashes like tears that could not fall. A war correspondent who entered the Kessel after the surrender wrote, "They were not men anymore. They were shadows of the empire that sent them here." At night, you could hear them whispering, not to each other, but to themselves. Prayers, memories, names of wives and children. One man repeated over and over, "Ich will nach Hause. Ich will nach Hause. I want to go home." But home was gone. In the ruins of a shattered factory, a group of men discovered a phonograph. They wound it slowly with trembling hands. The needle touched the record, and from the machine came a scratchy waltz. For a few brief minutes, amid frost and ruin, there was music again. And some wept. The Red Army's final assault was approaching. Soviet troops, hardened by the same winter, advanced block by block. Snipers moved through windows. Tanks crawled over corpses frozen in grotesque poses. Inside the German lines, discipline collapsed. Command posts were abandoned. Radios failed. The last messages from Paulus's headquarters grew faint and confused. "We are at the end. The men cannot go on. God forgive us." By late January, Stalingrad was silent. The city that Hitler had promised to conquer at any cost had become a monument of ruin, and the cost was everything. On the 31st of January, Soviet soldiers stormed the basement of a department store, Paulus's last command post. They found the field marshal sitting quietly, his pistol on the table. He did not resist. He simply said, "I have no more orders." The war in Stalingrad was over, but for those who survived, the nightmare had just begun. In the heart of the Russian winter, 100,000 men vanished. Not in battle, but in silence. Their bodies frozen, their names lost, their dreams buried beneath the snow. January 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad was no longer a war. It was a memory collapsing in slow motion. What was once a proud, industrial city had turned into a white wasteland of shattered walls and steel skeletons. The Volga lay frozen, a gray, lifeless scar cutting through the ruins. Every corner of the city held the dead. Frozen bodies stood half-buried in snow, rifles still clutched in their hands. The living stepped around them without words. The smell of smoke and decay lingered in the air, mixed with the sharp bite of frost. The Sixth Army, now split into northern and southern pockets, was barely breathing. Ammunition was nearly gone. Radios had fallen silent. Hospitals, if they could still be called that, were overflowing with men missing limbs, shivering, whispering prayers that froze on their lips. Inside one ruined theater, soldiers took shelter beneath the collapsed balcony. They huddled beside a dying fire, trading pieces of bread as if they were diamonds. One of them murmured, "The Russians, they're everywhere now." And he was right. The Red Army had turned Stalingrad into a siege of inches. Soviet troops moved house to house, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Snipers perched in windows, waiting for a flicker of movement. Tanks crawled through the streets like beasts in slow motion, their engines groaning in the cold. A German corporal, barely 20 years old, scribbled in his notebook, "We used to fight for the fatherland. Now we fight for one more day." At night, the horizon glowed red, not from bombs, but from the fires still burning in the ruins. The flames danced in the snow, turning the city into something unearthly. Men began to hallucinate from hunger and exhaustion. They spoke to the dead. They saw ghosts walking beside them, comrades long gone. Some even followed those visions into the blizzard and never returned. The once invincible Sixth Army had become an army of ghosts, fighting shadows, dying unseen. In those final days, Stalingrad was not a battlefield. It was a grave that refused to close. By the end of January 1943, The Sixth Army was broken into fragments. The Soviets advanced relentlessly, pushing the Germans into smaller and smaller pockets of resistance. On January 26th, Soviet tanks from the North and South fronts met at the city's center, cutting the Germans in two. Communication collapsed completely. The southern pocket, led by Paulus himself, was surrounded in what had once been the city's central district. Food supplies had run out. Ammunition was nearly gone. Soldiers fought with bayonets, knives, even their bare hands. When their guns froze, they swung them like clubs. In the north, General Strecker's men refused to surrender. They fought until the last bullet, the last heartbeat. They believed help might still come. It never did. On January 30th, Hitler addressed the nation by radio. He compared the men at Stalingrad to the heroes of Thermopylae, fighting to the last man. He did not mention that he had already condemned them to die. That same day, Hitler promoted Friedrich Paulus to field marshal, knowing full well no German field marshal had ever surrendered. It was a death sentence disguised as an honor, but Paulus did not take the bait. He had seen enough death. When Soviet troops stormed his bunker on January 31st, they found him sitting motionless beside a map, his uniform immaculate, his eyes hollow. "I have no more orders," he told them. He surrendered quietly. No gunfire, no defiance, just the end of a nightmare. In the following days, the remaining pockets of resistance fell one by one. On February 2nd, 1943, the last German unit surrendered in the northern ruins. The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the bloodiest battles in human history, was over. Out of the 300,000 men who entered the February 1943, the guns had gone silent. The battle was over, but for tens of thousands of men, the war was only beginning. The survivors of the Sixth Army, frostbitten, starving, hollow-eyed, were rounded up by Soviet troops and forced to march eastward. No trains, no warmth, no food, just endless white, stretching into nothingness. The Soviets called them fascisti, fascists, but most were just boys now, broken and limping, their faces unrecognizable beneath frost and dirt. One German medic later wrote, "We walked for days. The wounded fell and no one helped them. The Russians didn't need to. The snow did their work. Thousands collapsed during the march, their bodies swallowed by the blizzard, their names erased by ice. No graves, no markers, just silence. Those who survived the journey reached the prisoner camps. Endless barracks of misery scattered across the Soviet hinterland. Typhus and starvation claimed even more. In some camps, only 1 in 10 would make it through the first winter. For years, they vanished from the world. Families in Germany received no word. Wives and mothers waited at train stations long after the war had ended, hoping for letters that never came. A soldier's last note, recovered from his coat pocket years later, read, "We will not return. Tell them we were cold." The Soviet guards, hardened by their own losses, treated them with cold detachment. Some pitied them, others spat at them. For the Red Army, these prisoners were ghosts of the machine that had burned their homeland. For the Germans, they were reminders of a promise betrayed by pride. It would take over a decade for the last few survivors to come home. When they did, they came as old men, their eyes distant, their bodies thin, their souls still wandering the frozen plains. They had entered Russia as conquerors. They left it as shadows. The ruins of Stalingrad were cleared slowly, painfully, brick by brick. When the snow finally melted in spring, it revealed a city of ghosts. Bones mixed with rubble, helmets half buried in the mud, the twisted remains of tanks and guns. Soviet soldiers dug mass graves. They buried friend and foe alike beneath simple markers, names unknown, identities lost. The Volga flowed again, carrying away the ashes of one of history's greatest battles. In Germany, news of the defeat was met with disbelief. Goebbels called it a heroic sacrifice. Hitler forbade mourning. But mothers knew, wives knew. The silence on the Eastern Front spoke louder than any propaganda. He said the snow was beautiful, before it killed them all. The war raged on for 2 more years, but the myth of Nazi invincibility died at Stalingrad. It marked the turning of the tide, the moment when the frozen winds of Russia began to blow westward. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became sacred, a symbol of defiance, of endurance. Statues rose from the ashes, most famously, the Motherland Calls, towering above the city, sword raised high. For Germany, Stalingrad became a wound that never healed, a reminder of what happens when pride blinds reason and when men are sent to die for symbols carved from ego. Even decades later, veterans of the Sixth Army rarely spoke of it. Those who did often said the same thing. The cold was not the worst part. The worst was being forgotten. Today, the city once called Stalingrad is known as Volgograd, rebuilt, alive, and thriving. But beneath its streets, beneath the soil and the silence, lie thousands of men who came and never left. They are frozen in time, reminders of a world gone mad, and of the price humanity pays when it forgets its own limits. Soft orchestral swell rises, tragic but peaceful. Narrator, final line, slow and reflective. In the end, no bullet claimed them, no glory saved them. It was the winter, silent, merciless, eternal, that wrote their names into the ice of history. A story of pride, punishment, and the frozen silence that swallowed an army whole. The snow still falls on Stalingrad, soft, silent, indifferent. It covers the wounds, the ruins, and the forgotten. Empires rise and fall.